Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at a group, an organization you've probably heard of, maybe in passing.
Oh, definitely heard of them.
Yeah, especially when global affairs come up, the conversation turns to international relations,
Yeah.
foreign policy.
Right.
The Council on Foreign Relations, CFR.
Yes.
So what is the CFR? Why should we care?
Why should we care? That's a good question.
Well, we've got some stuff to work with. We've got some excerpts from their own website, their About page. We've got their Wikipedia entry.
Okay.
And we've got this PDF document called the Council on Foreign Relations, Origins and Purpose.
Okay. Sounds like a good mix. So what's the mission for this deep dive?
Well, I think to really get to the bottom of what this organization is all about, I mean, have you heard much about this organization?
Well, I've heard the name.
Yeah.
Like you said, it comes up.
Yeah, and it always seems kind of like,
A little mysterious.
yeah.
Yeah, Like, who are these people?
What are they doing?
And what are they actually up to?
Exactly.
Mm.
So let's dive in. The thing that strikes me right away is this organization has been around for over 100 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Founded in 1921, right after World War I. So they've seen it all.
Yeah.
A front row seat to
A
history.
front row seat to history. And they're not just passively observing.
Well,
This is a membership organization. It's a publisher.
right.
And their membership roster is, well, it's like the who's who of the American elite.
Elite.
Top politicians, CEOs, media figures, academics.
Okay.
So we're talking about people who have real influence.
Yeah, they're not just talking about things. They're actually...
They're the ones making things happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you can imagine how the discussions and reports that come out of this organization
Right?
might actually influence how the U.S. engages with the rest of the world.
I mean, that's their stated goal.
That's their stated goal.
That's what they say they do.
To inform the debates, to shape the decisions.
Right. Yeah. And their magazine, Foreign Affairs, I don't know if you've ever seen this.
I've heard of it.
It's been around for over 100 years, too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's the kind of magazine you would see like...
In a diplomat's office.
Yeah, or like cited in some dense political science article.
Yeah. It's serious ones.
That's the go-to, right?
See the footnotes. Yeah.
So let's rewind the clock a little bit.
Okay.
Let's go back to their origins. 1921,
Okay.
post-World War I.
Right.
The world is in chaos.
Yeah.
The global landscape is changing.
Things are uncertain.
Very uncertain, yeah. And there's this sense that the old ways of doing things just aren't working anymore.
Right. A need for something new.
A need for something new, exactly. So, enter the Council on Foreign Relations,
Okay.
a group of diplomats, scholars, financiers,
Okay.
people who have been advising President Woodrow Wilson during the war.
Okay.
And they realized they needed a space to keep having these conversations, to continue debating and discussing the future of international relations.
I see. So kind of formalize things a
Yeah.
little bit.
Like before, it was just,
Ad hoc.
ad hoc, exactly. And they wanted to have, like, a structure.
Right.
And they said, their own words from their About page, they wanted to avoid the isolationist tendencies that the U.S. had,
Had fallen into before the war.
Yeah. So they believed in global engagement,
Okay.
active engagement.
Actively involved in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But they knew that required an informed public,
Right.
savvy policymakers. And so they wanted to be that bridge.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So from the start, they kind of understood this connection between knowledge and power.
Totally.
Yeah.
They knew that to influence the world, you first have to understand it.
Makes sense.
So how do they go from this, small group of intellectuals to this powerhouse of influence?
Yeah.
Well, their Wikipedia page kind of highlights some key moments in their journey. During World War II, they set up something called the War and Peace Studies.
Okay. War and Peace Studies.
Yeah. Funded by the Rockefeller Foundation.
Okay.
And these were super secret meetings.
Ooh, secret meetings.
Yeah, where they produce hundreds of memos for the State Department.
Really?
Yeah.
So basically shaping policy behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, yeah. And their influence just kept growing after the war.
Okay.
Especially during the Cold War. You look at their membership roster from that era.
Right.
Secretaries of State, CIA directors, like all the big names.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just academics anymore. It was
the people, actually,
people in charge.
in the halls of power. Yeah. In fact, over half of the top U.S. foreign policy officials from 1945 to 1972 were CFR members.
That's a pretty big number.
It's more than just a coincidence.
Yeah.
And it's not just who they are, it's the connections they're forging.
Right, right. Because they're all in the same room.
They're in the same room, they're having these, dinners and debates and discussions.
Yeah.
And that shapes
The way they think about things.
the way they think about things.
Yeah.
Exactly. And a great example of their concrete impact is a guy named George Kennan,
Okay. George Kennan.
CFR member.
Okay.
He actually coined the term containment
Okay. I've heard of that.
in a 1947 Foreign Affairs article.
Oh, wow. So that idea came from
Came from the CFR.
the CFR. Okay.
And containment, as you know, became the defining strategy for dealing with the Soviet Union for decades.
Right. The whole Cold War.
The whole Cold War. So that's how an idea
Can have real world impact.
can have real world impact,
Yeah.
global scale,
Yeah. Wow.
and it goes beyond just ideas.
Okay.
So the CFR also played a key role in establishing the Marshall Plan,
Okay. Yeah.
which, as you know, was this massive effort to rebuild Europe after World War II.
Right. Billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars.
Preventing economic collapse.
Preventing economic collapse.
Yeah.
And arguably stopping the spread of communism in Western Europe.
Oh, wow. So the CFR is right there in the middle of that.
Right there.
Yeah.
It's not just about the money, though.
Right.
The Marshall Plan was also about rebuilding trust,
Rebuilding relationships.
rebuilding relationships,
Oh, yeah.
fostering cooperation in a continent that had been absolutely shattered.
And they helped make that happen.
They were instrumental in making that happen.
Mm.
And let's not forget about NATO,
Oh, yeah.
the North Atlantic Treaty Organization,
Mm.
this military alliance, cornerstone of Western security for over 70 years.
Still going strong.
Still going strong.
Yeah.
And guess what? Discussions within the CFR help lay the groundwork for that, too.
So they're involved in some pretty major stuff.
Major world-changing events.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we can't talk about the CFR without talking about Vietnam.
Yes. Vietnam. A turning point for the U.S.
A turning point for the U.S. and a turning point for the CFR, too.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It caused a rift within the organization.
Okay.
And what's really fascinating to me is that there was a CFR study group in the early 1950s, and they actually recommended engaging with Ho Chi Minh.
Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnamese communist leader.
Yeah.
They wanted to engage with them.
They suggested that the U.S. could potentially work with them.
Wow. That's a different path.
Very different path. Imagine how differently things might have turned out.
Yeah. It makes you think.
Makes you think. It highlights the complexities of foreign policy, right?
Definitely.
Even with all their expertise, all their influence, the CFR doesn't always get it right.
Right. And sometimes their advice is ignored.
And sometimes, yeah, with tragic consequences.
It's a good reminder that history is full of what-ifs.
Yeah.
Even the best laid plans.
Can go awry. So we've seen how the CFR's ideas and connections have shaped some of the most pivotal moments of the 20th century.
Yeah, they've been busy.
They've been busy. But are they still relevant today?
Good question.
Are they still shaping the world we live in?
I mean, the world has changed a lot since 1921.
A lot.
So are they keeping up?
Are they keeping up? Let's get into that.
Let's do it. The CFR story is far from over.
Okay.
They're still grappling with the biggest challenges facing the planet, and their work might be more relevant now than ever. Okay, so CFR, still relevant today. They're still very much a player on the global stage.
Still a player. What are they up to these days?
Well, for example, take their recent report on cyberspace policy.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It caused quite a stir, I think. It urged the U.S. to kind of fundamentally rethink its approach to cybersecurity in this new world.
Well, the internet's becoming increasingly fragmented. I mean, it's not the same internet that we grew up with,
No, not at all. And the report basically said, look, the U.S.'s traditional commitment to this free and open internet, it might need to evolve. Because the threats have evolved. We've got cyber threats, cyber warfare, and it's just a different landscape.
It was kind of a wake-up call, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was basically like, hey, the way we've been doing things, it's not going to cut it anymore. And it wasn't just about pointing fingers or saying, hey, you're doing it wrong. They had some concrete recommendations, too.
Like?
Well, for one, they called for stronger international cooperation on cybersecurity norms.
Okay, so like getting everyone on the same page.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Agreeing on some basic rules of the road. And they also said the U.S. needs to be more proactive in deterring cyber attacks.
Okay.
Not just reacting after the fact, but actually trying to prevent them from happening in the first place. And then, this was a big one, they even suggested that the U.S. might need to rethink its whole stance on internet governance.
Internet governance.
Yeah, like who controls the internet, who sets the rules, because right now it's kind of a free-for-all.
And that's a problem.
Well, could be, especially when you've got countries like China and Russia trying to exert more control over their own internet spheres. So the CFR is saying, hey, maybe we need to step up and take a more active role in shaping the future of the internet.
That's a pretty bold stance for them to take.
Yeah, it is. It shows that they're not afraid to challenge the status quo, to really think outside the box.
It's not just about publishing reports either. They also have these things called independent task forces.
Right, where they bring together all these experts from different fields, government, business, academia.
To tackle specific problems.
Exactly.
And they've looked at all sorts of things, haven't they?
They have. I mean, U.S.-China relations, which is obviously a big one these days.
That's a big one.
The future of North America, global health security, climate change, you name it, they've probably got a task force looking at it.
So give me an example. How does one of these task forces actually work?
Well, let's take the one on U.S.-China relations. Okay, so they brought together all these former government officials, business leaders, China experts.
Okay.
And they said, look, this rivalry between the U.S. and China, it's getting pretty serious.
It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. And it's going to shape the 21st century. So what do we do about it? And they came up with a bunch of recommendations. For example, they said the U.S. needs to be more realistic about China.
Realistic in what sense?
Well, recognizing that China's not going away, it's a major power, it's got its own interests, and those interests are sometimes going to clash with ours.
Okay, so not just treating them as an enemy.
Right. They said we need to be able to cooperate with China on some things, like climate change, for example, or global health. But at the same time, we need to be prepared to push back when China acts aggressively, like in the South China Sea, for instance.
Okay, so it's balancing act.
Exactly. It's about managing this really complex relationship. And the task force said the key is communication, making sure we're talking to each other, deterrence, making sure China knows there are consequences for bad behavior, and working with allies, because we can't do this alone.
So they're basically advocating for a more nuanced approach.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about being hawkish or dovish. It's about being smart and strategic.
Okay, so the CFR is out there. They're analyzing these big global problems. They're coming up with solutions. But how does this actually impact, me,
Yeah,
the average person?
right. Why should I care about what the Council on Foreign Relations is doing?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Why should we care?
Well, I think understanding the CFR helps you understand how American foreign policy is made
Okay.
and how it impacts your life.
Because it does impact our lives.
It does, in
But-
ways we might not even realize.
Right. It's like, we always talk about, oh, the government's doing this, the government's doing that.
Right.
But it's like, who is actually influencing those decisions?
Yeah, who's pulling the strings?
Who's pulling the strings?
Mhm.
And the CFR is definitely one of those players.
Definitely.
So even if you don't agree with everything they say,
Right.
understanding their influence can make you a more informed citizen
And a more engaged citizen.
and a more engaged citizen.
Right.
Because if you understand how these decisions are made, you can actually participate in the debate. You can have a voice. You can actually
Yep.
try to shape those policies.
Exactly. And it's not just about, high-level diplomacy.
Right.
The CFR's work on issues like cybersecurity, climate change, global health,
These things affect all of us.
they affect all of us. They impact
Uh-huh.
our daily lives. And their reports, their recommendations, they can influence government policies, business decisions,
The way we think about the world.
the way we think about the world, exactly. And then there's this whole other side to the CFR that we haven't even talked about yet.
Oh, what's that?
Their influence on popular culture.
Popular culture. What do you mean?
The movies we watch, the TV shows we binge, even those can be subtly shaped by the CFR.
Really? I never thought about that.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. Think about how many people get their understanding of, global issues from Hollywood.
Right, from movies and TV.
From movies and TV, exactly.
So if the CFR can make sure that those portrayals are, accurate, nuanced,
Thought-provoking.
thought-provoking,
Yeah.
then that's a good thing. Right.
Yeah, it is. It's a way to reach a much broader audience.
Right. It's not just the people who are reading foreign affairs,
Exactly. It's like, stealth diplomacy.
Stealth diplomacy.
Yeah, entertainment.
I like that. Stealth diplomacy. I mean, it's true, though.
It is.
Think about all the historical dramas, the war movies, the spy thrillers.
Right.
Like, those things are shaping how we understand the world.
And if the CFR can have a little bit of influence over those narratives, that's not a bad thing.
It's a subtle form of power, isn't it?
It is, but it's a powerful one.
Okay, so they've got this influence on policy. They're trying to shape popular culture. But they've also faced some criticism, haven't they?
Oh, definitely. I mean, no organization is perfect.
Right.
And the CFR has been around for a long time, so they've definitely had their share of critics.
What are some of the main criticisms?
Well, one of the big ones is that their membership is too exclusive.
Too exclusive.
Yeah, it's all these high-powered people, politicians, CEOs.
The elite.
Yeah, the elite. And critics say that doesn't really represent a diversity of viewpoints.
Right.
It's kind of like an echo chamber.
Right, like an insider's club.
Exactly. And there have also been concerns about conflicts of interest.
Conflicts of interest.
Yeah, because a lot of these CFR members, they have a lot of different hats.
Right.
They're involved in government, they're involved in business, they're on boards of directors.
So it's hard to know, like, where their loyalties lie.
Right. And critics say, well, are they really acting in the best interest of the country, or are they just trying to advance their own agendas?
It's a fair point.
It is. And then, in recent years, there's been this growing push for more transparency.
Transparency from the CFR.
Yeah, from the CFR and from other organizations like them. People want to know, where's their funding coming from? What are their biases? What are their connections? Because all of that can influence their work.
So it's about holding them accountable.
Exactly. And then there's this other criticism, which is that, they focus so much on this elite level diplomacy.
Right.
They forget about the people.
The grassroots.
The grassroots, exactly. The everyday citizens who are also affected by foreign policy.
Because foreign policy isn't just about, treaties and negotiations. It's about people's lives.
Exactly. It's about war and peace.
It's about the economy.
It's about immigration.
It's about climate change.
All these things that impact people's daily lives.
So it's important to have those voices at the table, too.
Absolutely. So the CFR has got a lot of influence.
A lot of power.
But they're not without their critics.
Right. And it's important to be aware of both sides of the story.
Absolutely. So what are your thoughts so far? What stands out to you about the CFR?
What stands out to me is just how deeply embedded they are in the American foreign policy establishment.
Yeah.
Like, they're not just some fringe group,
No. They're at the heart of it.
They're at the heart of it. And they've been there for 100 years.
And they've managed to stay relevant.
They've stayed relevant. They've adapted to a changing world.
Which is pretty impressive.
It is. It's also a little bit, concerning.
Concerning why?
Well, because it makes you wonder, like, how much influence do they really have?
That is a good question.
And are they always using that influence for good?
All right.
Because power can be a dangerous thing,
It can.
especially when it's concentrated in the hands of a few.
Okay, so we've talked about their influence, their power, the criticisms they've faced.
Yeah.
But there's this other side to the CFR that I think is really interesting.
What's that?
Their efforts to kind of reach beyond the traditional foreign policy bubble.
Reach beyond the bubble.
Yeah. They've been doing a lot more public outreach in recent years.
Really?
Yeah, they're trying to engage with the public.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think they're realizing that in today's world, foreign policy is no longer just this thing that happens behind closed doors. It affects everyone.
It does.
And people are more connected than ever.
Social media, 24-hour news cycle.
Exactly. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone's got a voice.
So to stay relevant,
Mm-hmm.
the CFR needs to engage with that broader audience.
Absolutely. They can't just be talking to themselves anymore.
Right. So how are they doing that? What are some examples?
Well, for one thing, they've been making an effort to diversify their membership.
Diversify their membership.
Yeah, they're bringing in more people from different backgrounds,
Right.
different perspectives, not just the same old, white guys in suits.
Right.
They're trying to get more women, more minorities, more young people involved.
So they're trying to broaden their reach.
Exactly. And they're also expanding their educational program.
Educational programs.
Yeah, they've got these fellowships, internships, all sorts of things for students and young professionals who are interested in international affairs.
So they're trying to cultivate the next generation of foreign policy thinkers.
Exactly. And it's not just about, grooming future diplomats and policymakers.
Right.
It's about giving everyday citizens the tools they need to understand the world.
To be informed.
To be informed, to be engaged.
Yeah. And then there's this whole thing with the entertainment industry.
Oh, yeah. The Hollywood connection.
The Hollywood connection, which is kind of weird, right? I mean, what's a foreign policy think tank doing messing around in Hollywood.
Right. But they're actually doing a lot. They've got members who are advising on films and TV shows that deal with global themes.
Really?
Yeah. They've worked on documentaries, they've worked on dramas, they've even worked on comedies.
So they're trying to, like, inject some of their expertise into popular culture.
Exactly. It's a way to reach a much wider audience with their message. And it's not just about, making sure that the facts are right. Right.
It's about promoting certain values, certain ideas.
So it's like soft power.
Yeah, it is. It's a way to shape the narrative, to influence how people think about the world.
It's kind of brilliant when you think about it.
It is. And it's working. People are talking about foreign policy more than ever.
Right, because it's in our movies, it's in our TV shows, it's in our music.
Exactly. It's part of the cultural conversation now.
And the CFR is right there in the middle of it.
Pulling the strings.
Pulling the strings. Subtly, but effectively.
So, what do you make of all this? How do you feel about the CFR's foray into popular culture?
I'm a little bit torn, to be honest. On the one hand, I think it's great that they're trying to reach a wider audience. Foreign policy shouldn't be this exclusive club.
Right.
It should be something that everyone can understand and engage with.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, I do worry about, the potential for manipulation.
Manipulation. Yeah, if they're too successful at shaping these narratives, it could create a situation where people are just passively absorbing their message.
Right.
Without really questioning it.
Without really thinking for themselves.
Exactly. So I think it's important to be aware of the CFR's influence, even when it's subtle, to be critical, to ask questions, to not just accept everything they say at face value.
I think that's good advice for anything, really.
It is.
Not just the CFR, but any source of information.
Any institution, any expert, any media outlet, we need to be critical consumers of information.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the CFR,
Yeah.
they're a complex organization.
Definitely. Multifaceted.
They've got their fingers in a lot of pies.
They do. And they're not always transparent about their motives.
Right. So it's important to be aware of that, to approach them with a healthy dose of skepticism.
But also, I think, to recognize the value of the work that they do.
The work they do.
Because they are, grappling with some of the biggest challenges facing the world.
They are. Climate change, cybersecurity, global pandemics.
The rise of China.
All these things that keep us up at night.
Right. And they're trying to find solutions.
They are. They're trying to make the world a better place.
Now, whether they're successful or not, that's another question.
Right.
But I think we should at least give them credit for trying.
I agree. So where do we go from here? What's next in our deep dive?
Well, I think we need to talk about the future of the CFR. They've been around for 100 years.
100 years.
Can they last another 100? What challenges do they face? How are they adapting to a changing world?
Good questions.
Yeah. And I think we need to talk about the implications for all of us.
The implications for all of us. What does the CFR's continued influence mean for the average person?
Right. How does it affect our lives, our future? That's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive and our look at the Council on Foreign Relations. Before the break, we were talking about the CFRs, well, frankly, their power, and asking you to think about their role in shaping everything, really. American foreign policy, how we see the world. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. And we've covered so much ground, haven't we? From containment during the Cold War to cybersecurity, even their work, who knew, in Hollywood. But now we need to ask, well, what does it all mean? Where do we stand with this organization?
Right. They have this outsized influence, and as we said before, that comes with a lot of responsibility. And people are definitely watching. They've faced criticism, haven't they? Especially about whether they really represent, well, all of us, not just a select few.
Definitely a valid point. If you're going to shape global policy, shouldn't you reflect the diversity of the world you're trying to influence?
Exactly. So here's something to think about as we wrap up this deep dive, and it kind of builds on everything we've been discussing, something to ponder as you go out and, continue exploring foreign policy and all that.
Okay, I'm all ears.
We focused on the CFR's impact, right? But influence goes both ways. It's not just how they change the world, but how the world changes them.
I like that.
They were founded over a century ago. Think about how different the world was back then.
Totally. No internet, globalization as we know it. China wasn't the powerhouse it is today.
Yeah.
The problems they're dealing with now, they're just not the same problems that, the founders faced back in the day.
Exactly. So the question is the CFR evolving? Are they keeping up with the times? Are they changing their approach, getting more diverse voices involved, expanding their expertise to really grapple with, well, with the 21st century and all its craziness?
Or are they stuck in their ways? Are they, holding on to these old ideas that just don't work anymore? That's something, well, any powerful group has to figure out, right?
100 years at the top. That's a long time. It takes work to stay relevant,
No.
right? You have to constantly look at yourself and be willing to change. So here's the takeaway, and I think it applies to, anything really. Don't just take the word of experts, even if they come from, these fancy institutions like the CFR. Question them. Think for yourself. Get different perspectives.
Exactly. Make up your own mind. Because the future, well, it doesn't depend on just a few people making all the decisions. It depends on all of us being informed and, well, engaged.
So that wraps up our deep dive into the Council on Foreign Relations. Hope you found it, thought-provoking, maybe even a little bit challenging.
If you want to keep digging, check out Foreign Affairs Magazine or their website. It's a treasure trove of, well, information.
And until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.